Well, staying on the dark side, we have an example coming up with this next film, Misery, of the dark nurse. Now, in this case, Kathy Bates, who plays our nurse, is not a professional nurse, but is in a nursing role, in that she's looking after a patient. The storyline here, adapted from the Stephen King novel. Writer Paul Sheldon, played by Paul Reiner, is rescued from a severe car accident by Annie Wilkes, who is Kathy Bates. The reclusive Annie nurses Paul back to health and refuses to allow him to leave her secluded house. Annie is a huge fan of Paul's Misery novels and forces him to write a new one after discovering that he has killed off her favorite character. So, what you're seeing here is a rather, if you were a patient, a rather terrifying encounter with a nurse. This is a patient-nurse relationship, which I don't advocate if you ever have a choice. Yes, the nurse in this case is her care is I would describe as self-serving and particularly unorthodox.
Pretty nuts, actually. I saw the movie and I never perceived her to be a nurse.
Well, what we was trying to capture, she's not a nurse, but it was the role, it was a nursing role, and so we were trying to capture some of those aspects. Because nursing is pretty wide.
I remember doing that to patients.
True confessions at dawn. Okay, we have thus far portrayed nurses, of course, in many guises, in many ways, but all of our nurses have been women. Well, we're about to move into the modern era, and we are now about to see 3 clips, 2 of which come from the same film, portraying men. And of course, this men being somewhat new in the professional nursing field, there's lots of commentary and lots of stereotypes. And so we've drawn 2 films. There aren't actually a lot of films that have male nurses as protagonists. So it was a little more difficult to pick. Well, one of the ones that you're going to see talk to her is actually a Spanish film. And this portrays a male nurse in a positive light. There doesn't seem to be, at least in the clip that you're about to see, doesn't seem to be any question about his role and what it represents. Why the heck is a man being a nurse? You know, all that kind of thing. By contrast, when we see Meet the Parents, which has Ben Stiller and Robert De Niro, there you get this again being American, not European. There's a tremendous amount of question as to why a man would want to be a nurse. If you're going to go into medicine, well, why wouldn't you be a doctor? In one part of the first clip, he doesn't address that issue. He wants to be a nurse. In the second clip, he actually challenges doctors in the room and saying, I prefer nursing. Nursing actually, as it relates to patient care. If you're a nurse, you can actually work with the patient. If you're a doctor, you spend most of your time in administration. So it was curious how that transition takes place. But so you get at least a bit of a hint of men in the nursing profession. We have a good old carry-on film, a carry-on nurse, and I'm going to let Claire help me with this one.
Well, this is a 1959 film, and it was the highest revenue film in Britain that year. And it takes place in a men's ward. In those days, men were separated from women, not so much anymore in hospital. Here the matron, or the head nurse, is strict and intimidating, but not cruel like Nurse Radcliffe. The patients get inebriated and revolt against the hospital staff. They use silly and sometimes hilarious capers which border on pandemonium. The jokes are corny by comedy standards, and a great deal of overt flirting goes on between student nurses and the patients. In Canadian schools of nursing, and specifically my school here, silliness, practical jokes, and flirting with the interns was not tolerated on the ward. And it was dealt with harshly if you were found out. Fun and games were reserved for time spent away from the hospital. At least a modicum of decorum was expected from us when we were in uniform. It's a 1959 film, and that's when I was just starting my 3rd year, and that's when we went to see it. And although it gave us a few chuckles, all of us that went, I couldn't help but thinking, my God, I hope that isn't what people think student nurses look like and do at the KGH school or something.
What I found interesting in that one was emphasis on in this particular clip, the hierarchy. It was very clear where you fell in the pecking order.
Oh, for sure.
Yeah, which that part I'm sure was some.
Yeah, very much our life.
That concludes our evening. Are there, before we all stand up, are there any questions or comments that anyone would like to make? From our nurse commentator?
I'm wondering how many people saw any of these pictures.
Well, I know Catherine has now.
Just as a matter of interest, who knows what the story is totally, or, you know?
Well,
They're kind of before the time.
most
These
of
people.
most of them were popular at different times in different places, but I wouldn't be surprised if everyone had seen all of them.
Oh, yes.
I mean, I couldn't get over when we started to go through this, how many there are. We talk of billions these days an awful lot. Well, they're not quite billions, but they're an awful lot. I read an article about the one graduate from KGH. I understand that the board of KGH approved men in nursing in 1899, and there wasn't a single entrant until 1968, and only one graduate in 1972. But in an exit interview with the Whig, I think it was, with that particular graduate, he said, or the reporter asked, well, how did you do it? I mean, how did you get through? And he said, essentially, I became one of the girls. I adopted all the interests that the other female students had, and I did what they did, and that's the way I survived. Because at the beginning, he said it was merciless teasing until I kind of became one of them. So I thank you all for coming out tonight. This has been a good experience for us at the museum, and I hope you enjoyed what we were able to share with you.
In defense of nurses, I think I feel compelled to say that they were good storylines, but I don't relate that much to what they did.
And that's an important aspect of it. It's any role portrayed, especially a role that everyone in society perceives they understand. It's what's shown on film isn't necessarily what
Goes on.
is. Yeah, and that's in one of the reviews I read, that's very much part of it. And they were throwing it back at nurses to be vigilant in that sense, that it's having a role to ensure that when the media portray you, that it's reasonably accurate. And the storyline, of course, but you want to be. I mean, we had several examples tonight where everyone understood what that person was meant to be, but it didn't reflect who nurses are and what they really do.
Yeah.
Anyway, thank you again.
Thanks for putting it
And please, if you haven't seen the new nursing gallery, I encourage you to go and visit it at the other end of the hall.
I didn't see Kill Bill.
I started when I was young.
Yeah, that was
I don't see that one with her ticket. I hope I don't see that one with the fashion guy's feet.